Hi, I'm Becca Ribbing, and I'm about to have a productive conversation with Mike Faraday.
Welcome to A Productive Conversation. It's me once again, Mike Vardy, and this time around, I am joined by Becca Ribbing. She is the author of the Clarity Journal and has been a coach for over a decade. She's on a mission to help people break out of the cycles of uncertainty, which you know how much I don't like uncertainty, and struggle that hold them back. She helps women going back and forth with the big, seemingly endless question of what to do next, so they can stop going around in circles and finally figure out what they truly want and create the clarity and momentum that they crave. We're going to talk about things like mindful productivity. Again, something you know I'm a big fan of. Nurturing and achieving hopes and dreams while having children. We dig into that a little bit. There's a lot that we cover in this conversation today, so let's get to it. Here's my conversation, a productive one at that, with Becca Ribbing. Becca, thanks so much for taking the time to join me today.
Thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to this conversation.
This has been on the books for a while. We were talking about this before we started going into the actual recording about like how far ahead we are booked with guests, and some interviews are done, some are not. Some are being done over Zoom, some are being done over Riverside.fm, which is what we're using now. There's a lot of crossover, and it's actually interesting because I think it's fitting. That we're finally getting some clarity around the way the podcast is going to go with the renaming of it not too long ago. And we're going to do more video around it. And again, having that nice little where you introduce yourself, which, spoiler alert, is it serves two purposes. Number one, it introduces you to the listener. But number two, it also allows me to know if I'm going to pronounce your name right or wrong. So I don't get that flub in there. It's amazing that thoughtfulness and stepping back and getting clear allows you to have those kind of insights to do just something that small, which until I told the listener this is like, oh, that's actually quite clever, as opposed to just being like a nice little clean intro. How you're the author of the Clarity Journal, and we're going to get into that, but let's get into that thoughtful approach to the way you approach things. First off, how important do you believe that is? And secondly, how did you get to the point where it was like, this is something that you need to do? You need to be more mindful about the way you approach things so that you can actually have clarity, move forward, and make things happen in the way that you really want them to happen.
So I think I have kind of funny little background about that. I learned how to meditate when I was 12. And I learned how to meditate from a 13-year-old girl. It was over a summer. I was living in New Jersey at the time. And this 13-year-old girl with very long, beautiful blonde hair, spoke like a Valley girl, was actually from the Valley in California. And she was the coolest thing ever. I don't remember anything about that visit, except that she was telling me about this meditation class she took at school. I think it was basically one of those a Buddhist monk came into her school and taught meditation just like for a 45-minute session. And so she taught me how to meditate. And I think that at a lot of levels, it really helped me get the gist of it, like the real meat of meditation, instead of all the rules. Like, adults complicate things. Teenage girls are just gonna be like, okay, sit cross-legged, put your hands on your knees and follow your breath. And that was, I think, about all she said. She probably said something about letting things go. But when we learn meditation as adults, a lot of times we get so focused on the end goal, like, oh, we're going to have no thoughts. Yeah. That's not the point of meditation. The point of meditation is actually to notice the thoughts and to accept the thoughts and be non-judgmental about the thoughts. And so I feel like this ties into your question a lot, because that noticing, I think I got trained very early on that it wasn't bad. But most of us, when we go through our childhood, spend a lot of time being told to ignore our anger, like shake it off, Like what other, I'm trying to think of other phrases we often
It's
tell our
like
kids.
it's like get it out of the way so you can move forward. It's always about what's next, not what's now.
Exactly. But when you're constantly reacting that way, then you're actually ignoring your own inner guidance, your own, like, your own nervous system is telling you, hey, this is a warning sign. Like if you're overloaded, you run a podcast, you have a really successful podcast where you're booking out 4 months. Well, if you're feeling overloaded about it, your system is telling you need to simplify. But if you're constantly pushing that away, then you're not simplifying the way your body is basically begging you to. And
yeah, it's like a lot of questions, right? Like I can tell you, when we were orchestrating how we want the podcast to look going forward, it was, why am I scheduling this far out? Like it wasn't, I mean, we were already there. Like, how did we get here? Why are we here? Why? I must have designed it this way for some reason. You know, why do I want to have 2 interviews per week? Why? A lot of whys. And I realized it's because, number one, and we talked about this before we hit record, I don't want to be doing podcast interviews during the summer because my kids are home. And I don't want to be saying, hey, keep it down while I talk to Becca here about, you know, her book and all the other things. But it was also about, I want to make sure that I can be present with the other things that matter to my business, to my audience, to the listener who is listening and saying, hey, what else can I get from Mike beyond these conversations? But you lose sight of that sometimes. You get caught up in the flywheel of it's time to do another interview. Oh, another book. 3 books came in while I was away, traveling recently. I'm like, oh, now these are here. And it's the stepping back, right? And I mean, learning meditation that early is fascinating to me because I think that, and I'd love for you to expand on that, is to your point about adults. I think that kids are largely more able to think about the present. Like, this is what I'm doing right now. I'm going to do this and everything else be damned. Whereas adults are always like, like I said, what's next? Oh, I've got to get to this. They're always feeling like they're chasing instead of actually like kind of just sitting with what's going on. Do you find that that's the case?
I definitely find that's the case. I think that also adults have more worries about right and wrong. Sure. Like, am I doing this right? Am I doing this wrong? I mean, kids do also, but it's a little more.
The stakes are higher, maybe? You feel the stakes are
higher. Adults just like, adults complicate things. Adults make simple things complicated. And I do it. We all do it. And I think one of the things that happens is that, like, in our lives, we're constantly growing. No one's listening to this podcast because they want to sit still for the rest of their lives and just do their the one job they've done forever, and they want to do it forever. They're here because they're interested and engaged. And being interested and engaged almost necessarily means that you are growing and you are constantly hitting new levels. And I think one of the things that I find is that when people are ready to jump to a new level, they don't always take stock of everything that's going into it. They are wanting a change. Sometimes they feel stuck. Sometimes they feel overwhelmed. And instead of really taking a look at the whole picture, like what is good, what is going well, and what could be just tweaked, they usually focus on the problem. And then when you focus on the problem and you forget to really acknowledge the things that are going well, then you have a tendency to change systems in ways that aren't necessarily as productive as they could be.
Right. So I've seen this happen a lot. We're like, oh, well, the app isn't working for me. I need to get a new app. This app will make things better. Where does the Clarity Journal fit into all of this?
So the Clarity Journal is really for that spot where when you're feeling really stuck, what am I going to do next? You need a change. And you don't know what that change is yet. I find that a lot of times when people are in that space, what it really is that in the back of their head, they've got a couple different ideas and they haven't really been able to embrace it. They keep thinking about the safe idea, the idea that, their friends and family will approve of, the thing that feels comfortable and feels easier, like not necessarily easy, but easier on the continuum.
Right.
And then when I start talking to someone, I start asking questions. It always comes out, they've got this thing in the back of their mind that they really haven't even allowed themselves to explore. So the Clarity Journal is all about exploration. I actually came up with it. I came up with the idea for it when I was coming out of my own cycle of this. I had my second son, I had all sorts of stuff go wrong. I had a bad chiropractic adjustment in my first trimester. And if you know anything about pregnancy, like your ligaments, it made it really hard to recover. I was using a cane for most of my pregnancy. Whereas for my first pregnancy, I was one of those glowy people that was doing yoga every morning.
So the type of pregnant woman that most pregnant women hate.
Exactly. I was the type most people hate the first time, and the second one, the type that everyone pities.
Yes.
And then we moved from DC to Seattle in my third trimester. And then my son was born. And then my son had chronic ear infections that were horrible. And it turned out he was allergic to a bunch of antibiotics. And it was just like this cycle of I just could never get my head above water. And everyone knows what I'm talking about. Sure. Everyone's been through those cycles, unless you're 12. And so finally that cycle was ending. My son was getting into a better place. We figured out the ears. And as I was coming out of that, I did what everyone does. I internally was looking for a change and yet not really seeing it for myself. And one of my friends was great. I was talking to her on the phone and I'm doing that cycle of back and forth. I don't know. And she stops me and she says, Becca, you're a coach. What would you tell your clients? And it was just what I needed to hear. And I stopped and I got off the phone with her and I wrote down 30 questions that I ask my clients. And then I started answering those questions for myself. And as I was going through that process, it was just amazing to me how clarifying and grounding that is. And it helps you get out of that cycle of being stuck, get out of that cycle of focusing on a problem from the perspective of the problem instead of the perspective of the solution. And so one of my realizations is that I needed to really get back to writing. I had let it go when my head was underwater with my son. Mm-hmm. And so this was my first project. I just really dived into it. First books always take longer. So it's been a labor of love that has been a long time coming, but it's really designed to help you if you don't have the time for coaching or you don't have the money for coaching. It's just to help you get out of your own head and start looking at the challenge of what to do next in a more productive way.
I'm a big believer that journaling is one of the most undervalued and underutilized productivity tools out there, because what we tend to do is we tend to focus on the activity and not on how that activity is either coming to bear or whether it's the right activity at all or what have you. Again, back to that podcast idea. I'm like, why am I doing so many of these? Let's press pause for the rest of the year on these and make sure that we can focus on some of the other things. Have you been a journaler before this point? Or was it especially when you went through that phase of this underwater period? We'll define it as being underwater. Did you journal during that phase, or did you feel like everything got cast aside? And then since you've written the Clarity Journal, are you either back into journaling? How does that look for you? Because I journal daily and there are moments where I give it up, and I don't give it up. Let's say I break the chain. I don't get it done. I've actually gone back and retroactively done some journaling too, just to kind of figure out how the breadcrumbs led to where I am. But did you find that if you were a journaler, which you'll share with us, did that period cause a large gap? And then since you've put together the Clarity Journal, have you gotten back to it, or is it something you've started anew?
I was definitely a journaler when I was younger. I think I stopped journaling right around the time my first son was born.
Mhm.
And this has definitely gotten me back into journaling. I am definitely on the bandwagon of journaling almost every day. I like journaling for myself. I also really value journaling with other people's writing prompts
Mm.
because sometimes even when you're journaling, I mean, I've got stacks underneath my bed. I have stacks of journals from when I was in my teens
Right.
where all I did was go on and on about guy troubles.
So it was a
Like,
diary in essence, really. Like,
it
cause
was
I,
a
yeah,
diary and it was like definitely dear diary.
yeah,
Um, but I think that sometimes people fall into that rut with journaling that they're so
it's a
focused.
chronicle more than introspective, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's really a place for both. I think that the chronicling can help you really be aware of patterns too. But I think it's really good if you can kind of push yourself to move a little bit outside your comfort zone when you are journaling, so that way you're kind of really using it to evaluate where you are and if you're happy. I do feel like we as adults forget that happiness is a big goal.
Mhm.
Like that if you're really unhappy at your job or if you're really unhappy in your relationship or whatever, if something's not working for you, that you actually have the agency to change that.
Mhm.
And I am a big believer in journaling for recognizing the reality of a situation and being able to really feel more empowered about it.
As you're talking about this, it definitely is something that I've found challenging because you're right. It can become a chronicle. But the other thing is when you have to ask those questions, sometimes it's easier to chronicle than to ask those questions. And that's why the external prompts are so helpful because it's not that you're running away from it. I think you can be, at least, but it's just, as you say, easier to kind of go with what that comfort, because comfort can turn to complacency really quickly without you noticing it, as opposed to pushing beyond. And I've found that when I've stopped journaling, it's because I'm coming up against a question that there's nothing left to ask, and it's got to be that question. And you're like, or a series of questions or prompts that you have in the clarity journal that I'm like, oh man, if I go down this path, it's completely either there's not as much certainty around it, or it's gonna get hairy and uncomfortable, and I don't know. So how, even beyond the journal, and you do coaching as well, how do you help someone get past that level of to get to that point where it's like, look, you got to go here now. There's nowhere else for you to go. It's time to follow what that prompt is, listen to that prompt and explore it deeper. Or it's, because if you don't, you're not going to grow. You're not going to progress. You're basically now just on the hamster wheel spinning consistently and going nowhere fast.
So it's kind of funny. I feel like when a client comes to me, they really only hire me if they're already there. And if they already have at least some inclination, like some inkling that they are at that spot, because no one's going to pay money to avoid the question. You know what I mean?
If they are, then that's a whole other thing they should be journaling about.
If that they are, that is a whole different thing that they should be journaling. And I say that, and it's actually funny. When I was younger, I've been a coach for quite a while. So I started coaching when I was in my mid-20s. And there was actually a certain group of guys that would hire me, that they were all in their late 50s and 60s. And they hired me because I was young and they thought I was going to just tell them that they were right all the time.
Right.
So I guess there are people that will pay for that, but it's been a while.
So the validation factor, right? Which I mean
Right.
is not, if you're hiring for validation, you're not going to get it from a coach. If you are, then they're not a coach. They're a teammate or colleague at best, or they're somebody that is, and like in our case, it's somebody who reads our work or listens to us. Like validation comes from like, you're doing a great thing. A coach goes, hey, this is, you're doing well here, but, there's some, again, we go back to sports. We talked about the Kraken before we jumped on board, the Seattle Kraken, the new hockey team, because you're based in Seattle. Like, if the coach of the Kraken was just like, hey, everybody, you're doing a great job, that team will be mired in mediocrity forever. Right. And you can't do that if you want to win a championship. So I totally hear where you're going with this.
Yeah. So I think the thing that I really always talk to people about, like if I'm talking to them where I'm not actually their coach because they haven't decided to hire me yet, is that I do work with a lot of people in their 50s, 60s, and it is really hard to see someone that's 59 years old that truly feels like they've been off track for like decades. That is heartbreaking to me and really important to still fix, because most people, who's retiring at 65 these days? Not very many people. Mm-hmm. So I mean, maybe in Canada, not in the US.
No. And even then, I mean, I've done a talk. I did a presentation for a bunch of retirees, and it was around time management. And the thing is, they didn't know what to do with their time because they had used it for someone else for so long. And now they had all this freedom, and they're like, what do we do? And so that also can be heartbreaking, where they've given up the prime years to someone else, and now they're like, okay, I'm 65. Now what? And you know, now they're walking with a cane because they've not taken good care of themselves. And like, how do I do this stuff? So it depends on the vocation, obviously. As a writer, and you're a writer too, like retirement is not something that we're just going to do. We will probably write until we can't write anymore. But right. If you are someone who you're in a position where retirement is the thing that you just do when you've worked until 65, 70, whatever, the other side of that could be challenging, if not terrifying.
Yeah. And I think that it's really important to recognize that, you know, there are always reasons not to do it now. Mm-hmm. I have kids, so I have two very energetic reasons to always put something off. But even people without kids, there's always a reason. And it always feels like that next step will be easier. And the next step is never easy because of starting friction. Right. If you are getting started in something new, it's always going to be hard. And it's always going to feel like maybe you're making the wrong decision at the beginning, because it's harder than being static, being complacent. But that doesn't mean it's actually not the right thing. Mm-hmm. It means that you need to get support. You need to make sure that you are reaching out to people that can help you. It's always amazing to me how many people think that if they reach out to someone for advice, that person's going to be mean to them, like not just ignore them, but like actively like judge them. And no one judges them. Like if you reach out to someone who's a coach and ask for free coaching, that's probably not going to go over great.
Right.
They'll probably just ignore your request. But assuming you're not in the coaching sphere and you just are looking to change industries, reaching out to other people in the new industry, you know, it works actually really well if you keep in mind that it's more like cold calling or sales, where if you send out 10 emails and you get 2 responses, that's actually a great rate of return. Mm-hmm. And I think that we just need to, and I say we, because I think we all run into this when we're in that cycle. I think coaches need coaches. I think that everyone needs support to help see where they are holding themselves back. Yeah. And it's just important to do. And you can stay small. No one's really going to criticize you for it, but it's also not as scary as you think it is to try something new, because if it really is a well thought out path change, then even if that particular thing doesn't work out the way you want it to, it will lead you onto a better path that's closer to what you want to be doing.
I have a couple more questions as we get close to wrapping up. The first one, we talked about starting and the fear of starting. When I interviewed my friend Charlie Gilkey, who wrote about he wrote a book called Start Finishing. Scott Belsky's written a book called The Messy Middle. Mm-hmm. The start can be scary. The middle can be a real challenge too. Especially because the start I find, and I'll speak from personal experience, there can be a lot of clarity around the start, but once you're in it, you're so close to it, sometimes that things can get fuzzy, right? Things can get like, and you've also got this thing that you've made progress on, but now these other things are happening, whether it's family, whether it's work stuff, whatever. And so that can get, again, fuzzy and unfocused and things of that nature. So let's say you're at a phase where you've started, you're moving forward, and then all of a sudden, like you said, you get stuck, but not stuck in the beginning, but stuck in the middle. What are some of the things that people can do that you teach and that you talk about, even some of the prompts in the journal maybe, that can help people push through that, that thrash that Charlie Gilk, that's what he calls it, or the messy middle as Scott Belsky refers to it?
Yeah, I absolutely love the book, The Messy Middle. So first of all, I'd say go read The Messy Middle. But I think that part of the problem with The Messy Middle is that we do not hear the stories that go into the middle of most things. My example usually is childbirth. I've been through childbirth twice. It does not look like a sitcom. It's not 10 minutes of yelling and then a happy baby and like everyone's all cleaned up. And
No.
I think we forget, like, you watch you read an article by Oprah or where it's like, oh, this like amazing person doing amazing things. And then there's always like a paragraph or two of, and here was the hard part, but it's like, it's really just a device, like a story device to move the story along.
Yeah.
Like, you don't get into it.
Yeah, it's transitional. Yeah. That's about it.
It's transitional. So I think part of the thing that I say when you're in the messy middle is to make sure you're surrounding yourself with people who understand the messy middle, because it is easy to give up if all you're seeing are those stories. The story of, Facebook being started in a dorm room and all of a sudden they're like public and have billions of dollars. Like that's not, that's not the reality. And I think also to be really mindful of story when you're judging what you're doing, making sure that you actually have the resources you need to do it. I do think that when people fail, it's because they started something not realizing they didn't have the resources that they needed to make it succeed. Microsoft's a really good example of this. Like, yeah, sure. Like Bill Gates dropped out of college, but his dad was like one of the best lawyers in Seattle. Like he came from a very privileged background to begin with and a very connected background.
Right.
He did not start this from a lower middle class suburb of Detroit.
Right. I mean, an example that I just read about today is I'm a pro wrestling fan, and there's this new organization called All Elite Wrestling started by Tony Khan, and they're already in competition with the big boy, WWE. But his father owns the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Fulham FC, football club. Now, his father, Shad Khan, he has an amazing story because he came from a middle-class family in Pakistan. But Tony Khan comes from that privileged background that his father kind of laid the groundwork for. So when someone says, wow, he built this from nothing, yes, but he also had a lot of resources, mainly monetary, at his disposal. So yeah, I mean, there's not equanimity around all of these people's, starts and middles and finishes, because resources are just that. They vary and are nuanced from person to person, situation to situation, right?
Right. But I think that part of that is to then, because I am not trying to discourage anyone who doesn't, have a wealthy parent from starting something. It's just imperative that you actually have reality, like that you have enough experience. I often joke, we're like living in the Google generation. We believe we can Google something and figure it out. And we really undervalue human experience. And the fact that in order to process the information you're getting from Google, in order to process any written or video information, you really need the human experience to filter through like what's going to work for you, what's not going to work for you. And so if you are thinking about starting something up, really making sure that you reach out not just to business coaches, but also to businesses, to people in that situation, and be really, I'm not going to say blunt. That's not quite the right word, but raw, authentic.
Yeah.
Like, I think we often see the Instagram stories and want to present the Instagram story. And it's like, well, okay, I have these resources, I have these strengths, I have these weaknesses. How do I blend this into a system that works best for me? Because I do also find, and this, I'm going to get on a soapbox here for a second. Mm-hmm. When we were kids, we go to school and you get your report card. And on your report card, say you got an A in math and a B minus in writing. Right. Your parents can be like, that's really nice about the math, but you really need to spend time focusing on the writing. And they're going to say it like this. And then when we're in school, like teachers are great at compliment sandwiches. I mean, we're taught it. Like that's actually like a phrase you're taught in school. You give a compliment, you give the thing you really wanted to say to them, and then you give another compliment. Right. And we all know that what they really wanted to say was really all they meant. And we've trained ourselves to think that way. And it's so funny. So I get on a call with a new client, and this happens almost every time I get on a call with a new client. I will be listening to them, and about close to the end of the first session, maybe in the second section, I will start pointing out to them strengths that I am hearing based on the stories they are telling me. And the first time that happens, every time they get really quiet, and they're not like happy quiet. It's like, I don't know whether I believe you quiet. And that quiet comes from feeling like it's not really a strength. And so then I'll explain, like, okay, you have that strength. It comes easy to you. So that is actually where your best value add is, because you don't have to spend a lot of time worrying about it. Like right. Before we got on this call, you were talking about like like people who know how to organize and who can keep people on schedule are amazing. But if you don't have that skill, you should not be trying to be someone in operations. Right. If you're not great at math, you shouldn't be like constantly trying to like figure out how to do like higher level math. We should be teaching kids, hey, it's okay. You need to hit a basic level of competency in these areas that are not your strength, because you do need to hit a basic area of competence, basic level of competency. Sure. However, what we really want to focus on is helping you grow these strengths that you're obviously great at. I was telling this story on another podcast, and the woman laughed. She had been in radio for a long time, and now she has a really good podcast. And she laughed, like, you know what they told me in school? Every single report card, that I needed to stop talking so much in school. And it's like, no, you need, like, our teachers, our parents need to recognize that while persistence is great, like, and you should be teaching persistence, there's a difference between persistence and like just recognizing that using your strengths is going to be more efficient.
We could have a whole conversation about that, because I believe that time management is one of those things that's not taught in schools either, and yet it's something that we all need to leverage. But as we get close to wrapping up, because I want to be respectful of your time and the time of the listener, clarity, awareness, perspective, all of these soft skills are hard. They fall under qualitative, right? Like qualitative elements of productivity. And I find, and I don't know, I mean, I'm sure you've come across this in your practice as well, is that people get really hung up on the quantitative, like the things that they can feel, touch, see, count, right? Inbox Zero is a great example of that. I bring that up a lot. Like Inbox Zero is such a powerful productivity tool. Not really, but quantitatively it is, because you can say I had 83 emails and I got to 0, therefore, ergo, I was productive. Well, were you? Like, so when it comes to finding and trying to either establish clarity or maintain it, and I know that's a loaded phrase, how do you help someone shift their perspective or their kind of focus? There's another soft skill word on this thing I can count, this thing I can feel, this thing I can touch, against this thing that can be rather ambiguous, maybe a little bit, amorphous, where it's like I can't really, grab it, but I know I need it. How does someone shift from, or at least find balance between those two?
Oh man. Now you're touching on something that I could spend another hour talking about. I'm actually in the middle of writing my second book, and the second book's title is Mindful Procrastination. And I really believe that when we are focused on productivity issues, a lot of times we're focused on the productivity issue instead of what's behind the productivity issue.
Right.
And we have all of these things that drive us. Like if you read a bunch of productivity books, it's all just do it. It all ends up boiling down to just do it, just over schedule, just like it's all about how to fit more in, as you were saying.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to chime in here real quick. I would say that that's the old set of productivity books. Right. The newer ones, and I'm sure you've read them and you start in your research for this, some of the other ones are coming around. They're coming around to this idea of, well, maybe productivity isn't about like efficiency and effectiveness. Maybe there's more to it than that. But you're right. Like books like Getting Things Done, as much as I love David Allen's work, and all of the old school mentality around productivity when we weren't having as much coming at us every single day consistently, was about get it done. But continue on, because I think that this is
there are a lot of books still coming out with the get it done. But you are right. Sure. There is definitely there's
a space that we're seeing it kind of come in. But you're right. It's in the minority for sure. But yeah, continue please, because I know we could both talk about this for a while.
We could talk about this for a long time. I think that look, there's a reason why you're not being productive. Like if you have something you want to be doing, or if there's something you feel like you should be doing and you're not doing it, that's the second situation is probably more likely what you are running into. And those shoulds are toxic. Mm-hmm. I mean, you may have to deal with them if the shoulds are from your boss. You may have to deal with them if you're bootstrapping a company, but recognizing that the shoulds themselves are toxic and being able to be realistic about being in like a crappy space and hopefully I'll get through it in 6 months is a very different space than telling yourself that you have a productivity problem. Right. You don't have a productivity problem. You have a problem with you're not using your strengths well enough right now. And you're trying to get yourself to a place that you want to be doing that.
Yeah, we're going to have you back on the program when that other book comes out. And hopefully it won't be as long. I will
send you an email.
And it won't be as far of a gap either, because procrastination is a whole other area that we could get into. And I'm looking forward to that next conversation. But I want people to go check out the Clarity Journal right now. And also, so where can people pick up the book and where can people keep up with you? So that way, as you're going on this journey with this new book that you're working on, as well as, the other stuff that you talk about on your website, where can people connect with you?
You can connect with me on BeccaRibbing.com, which is Becca, Becca, Ribbing, Ribbing. And you can find the Clarity Journal on Amazon.
Excellent. Becca, thanks for having a productive conversation with me today. I look forward to the next one.
Thank you so much. This was a blast.
Thanks to Becca for joining me on the program today. We talked about a lot of stuff, and you can find out all that stuff quickly, simply, easily, links, everything at productivityist.com/podcast 405. You can also find out more about our sponsors, the ads you heard, all that stuff, the things that make this podcast go at productivityist.com/podcast sponsors. That's one way to support the show. Another way to support the show and get access to the 400 plus episodes simply, quickly, easily. Subscribe to the podcast, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you are listening to this podcast, hit the subscribe button. That way you can easily search all of the past episodes, but also get the next episode and all subsequent episodes delivered to you seamlessly. And next time, I've got Preen Fark joining me on the program. That's going to be episode 406, but hit the subscribe button. That way you get episodes 406, 407, 408. You get the drill. Thanks again for joining me today. That's it for this time around. Until next time, I'm Mike Vardy, the host of A Productive Conversation, reminding you to stop doing productive and start being productive. See you later.